All right. So we've got a couple things on the agenda today. The first is on make check brainstorming ways to improve reliability and reduce runtime of PR checks from Casey.
Yes, hello, thanks. Um, this kind of came out of a discussion that I was having with Ilya and Ceph about potentially moving some tests out of MakeCheck into Teuthology. Um, the, the, I think MakeCheck has become more and more problematic as the years go by, doing more and more and becoming less reliable. Um, and it's kind of hard to change that without requiring a big investment in rewriting tests, um, or spending a lot of time debugging things. And so I'm really just brainstorming kind of easy things that we can do to have a big impact. And so the main suggestion that I had was to take long running tests out of MakeCheck and just have those run in the relevant Teuthology suites, under the assumption that PRs were going through Teuthology for validation. But like all things in Ceph, that's complicated and has a lot of trade-offs. So just wanted to start a discussion here and see if we could agree on maybe an overall strategy, or maybe some easy changes that we could make in the meantime.
I think it's a great idea personally. It's come up in other contexts too.
Yeah, I agree. I would try to see. I mean, I don't know how to gather those stats, but people are running the Jenkins suite like all the time, and there are tests that are always failing and hardly ever find issues in the code that you try to merge. So for me, those are the ones that are causing problems and giving about. And
Sorry, Yuval, I'm having a little trouble understanding you. Is it possible that that it's not going through your headset mic?
hello, is it better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So what I'm saying is that um, I'm not sure how exactly to gather those stats, but I assume there is a way to do that because there should be a considerable amount of stats. And from my personal experience, there are certain failures, not only in MakeChecker, but overall in the Jenkins CI suite. So there are certain tests that are constantly failing. So I know that there are a couple of tests that I need to run several times before I can merge my PR. And quite often, those tests that are failing never find issues in the code that I try to merge. So the combination of tests that are constantly failing across the board for many people that are trying to push PRs on one hand, and on the other hand, they don't find bugs, um, gives like could give us a hint on what needs to go away.
Question from Joseph. Can Jenkins call out most failed tests? I know that the Jenkins pipeline does collect some statistics, but I'm not sure about that. But we can check into that. That's a good question.
Yeah, imagine it's easy to get stats for failure rates of specific Jenkins checks, but not necessarily specific test cases within them. It might be interesting to find a way to look at that.
So I know the C-tests program outputs some textual format. I'm not sure if we can get it to output more machine-friendly output, or if someone already knows this, if it's already doing that. And then perhaps that stuff could be aggregated time to run the tests and failures would probably be very useful.
Yeah, and I think I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but I think a very important aspect of it is whether these failures found an issue, right? Because if a failure found an issue in the code that I try to merge, then it's great. It's great that it failed. But if the failure just goes away after I put in the comment of the PR, whatever, make API check or whatever that always fails and never find bugs, then maybe this is not a valuable check.
There seem to be two different kind of issues here, and two different things that people are concerned about. One is the kind of the reliability of the tests, and the other is what should or should not be executed on each PR and serve as a gate for merging, or in other words, be a required check. So, like speaking from the RBD perspective, I know that some RBD tests are, flaky, and because we have a lot of them, and they are also run in different combinations. If you were to compile the statistics that you've just talked about, RBD would probably be maybe not the top one. The API check would probably be the top one, but RBD would certainly be there, number second. And that's a thing that I guess we've never prioritized, like many of these, or I think all of these tests that are known to not be reliable are years old. And part of the reason for why they're not addressed is that Jenkins does not make it possible to collect any sort of breadcrumbs, any like debugging information as to why the test failed, or as the case may be, timed out. We don't get a core dump. We don't get even just something as simple as the list of stack traces. That's not available. All you see is the test sec faulted is just a message that a particular test sec faulted, and that's it. And if you can't, someone generally tries to reproduce locally, but people only have so much patience to run something in a loop, and the reason they fail in Jenkins typically is that Jenkins is heavily oversubscribed. There's a ton of work, like a ton of stuff happening on those nodes, and the timings are very distort. There can be tests that locally take 10 minutes to run, and in Jenkins it takes like 40 minutes. And of course, all kinds of race conditions can be triggered there, because if the test doesn't have a weight in a particular place, or doesn't synchronize with something, then it either fails or can even crash. So that's one thing. And what I would personally like, independent of what we do, to resolve the other issues, is to get to get Jenkins to give us some debug data for when this something like this happens, and for the unit tests that we have on the RBD side. And I think CStore is becoming a kind of a second most unit tested component now in Ceph. I think core dumps is something that would be appreciated. So that would hopefully take care of the reliability issue. We can, of course, also just disable tests that are unreliable, either for the time being or just in perpetuity. The other issue is just how long it takes, and whether or which tests should be required. I'm pretty sure that for you, eval, for the things that you are working on, even if even if the tests don't fail, even if they all pass, but you have to wait for like 2 hours for that to happen, you would probably still not be happy if that happens in every push, because 90% of those tests you don't care about, or maybe even 95, right? If you're working on RGW, there's no way you care about any of the tox tests, any of the dashboard tests, any of the RBD tests for that matter, right? That's just time that you have to wait for the checks to hopefully become green and for you to be able to merge your PR. We've had a discussion with Casey and Matt in the last couple of days on the channel. And there are a couple of, I guess, proposals there or ideas. One is to make these checks, like basically keep them as is, hopefully improve their reliability, but keep the structure as is, meaning that they would still take a long time to complete, but change the change the settings such that they're not triggered on every push, but instead are requested with a comment only after the PR is ready. So it's reviewed and everybody's happy, and you just want it to get merged. That's when you trigger those checks and they get run, hopefully once or maybe twice if they need to be retriggered, instead of on every push. So I see this is my proposal, and this is driven by the fact that I see, even for minor PRs that are very small, and people still like those PRs still go through multiple pushes, sometimes dozens, sometimes many more than that, with people doing like minor additions or minor changes, or purely just it's obvious that they are experimenting with stuff, that this PR like shouldn't even be open. They should just do all of that locally and then push once, or and the only changes should be in response to review comments, not to not to just just constantly pushing several times a day. That's one thing. And like, I don't want to like argue whether like people should be free to push, I guess, if they want to, but the checks clearly don't need to be executed in those cases. So if these checks were triggered on request as opposed to automatically on every push, then I think that would save a ton of these executions in Jenkins, meaning that the load would go down and the queuing time. So when you actually request it manually, it would be run immediately, as opposed to you having to wait for it to even start running, let alone complete. The other proposal is to dismantle these checks, or change, like split them into several smaller ones that would be per component and not required for merging. So, for example, RBD checks would be triggered by an RBD specific comment, like RGW unit tests. If you have any, would be triggered by by yet another comment, and so on. The downside there is that we would lose the global gate aspect of this. But it seems like many people think that the global gate isn't all that useful because these checks don't find issues, and there's really no way for like an RBD check to find an issue in an RGW pull request. So those are the two kind of proposals. One, I guess, is maybe shorter term. The other is might take a few days to implement, but I think that's a summary of what was discussed in the thread. And I just wanted to provide all of that context for for discussion in this meeting.
Thanks. I think all these are great ideas. Um, there is also, I know in GitHub is able to identify the kind of area of the code that was touched, and it puts a tag according to that. So maybe instead of putting that burden of deciding which test to run on the reviewer or the author of the PR, that they've touched one file in common and they think it's only RGW, but it actually touches something else. Then when you run the make check, then it would decide which set of tests to run.
I think there is some value in that. The labels that we assign, so I suppose this could be based on the labels, and the labels that we assign, that's actually driven by the labeler action that we have. So that's customizable, and we could make it so that like even if you assign a label manually, like for example, like that the area of the code isn't explicitly touched, but you still want the checks for a particular subsystem to run, and you add that label, and they get run from that point on. That still doesn't address I guess the fact that like hopefully per component checks would be they might be faster depending on the component, but it still feels to me like given the kind of the workflow that I've seen people kind of follow, they're doing this on every push. Still seems like it just generates unnecessary load on Jenkins servers, because I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it does seem to me like it's people don't generally like look at those tests or are interested in the test results there. They just push to make their work available. It's not necessarily ready, and running the checks, even if they are kind of smaller in scope and take less time to run, might be. So I'm not sure. Maybe I'm trying to take this too far, but it's just a thought that I have.
John, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, thanks. So a lot of what I was originally going to say has been covered by Ilya and Yuval already, but yeah, the thought of partitioning and then having the jobs be related to what you've actually changed is probably relevant to this discussion. The I know that certain PRs that only touch docs will not run make check, for example. Right now, it's kind of a little bit of a hack in the scripts that Jenkins runs, but I think if it was generalized, it could be very helpful for folks. One other related suggestion is that if a PR is created in the draft status, maybe it would not run the job automatically. you'd have to ask for it to run a particular job. As in you're saying, hey, it's draft. I know it's not done. I don't need it to run everything. Maybe I just want to run it on the Python stuff or RGW or whatever. That's it for me for now.
If I may, I suggest to make it always by request. I don't I don't see a reason to when I ran those checks or when they ran for me. I don't really care which tests are relevant or which are not. It's just to make sure that everything, all the gates are okay and everything is okay. So why not make it by request always without separating into groups, into levels?
Well, this is exactly the proposal that I came up with in that thread. So keep everything as is. Again, hopefully improve the reliability so that you don't need to like retrigger then. But keep it by request. And by the way, my proposal, just to be specific, I'm not suggesting that when the PR is pushed, like nothing should happen. I think the build should still occur. So we would have a check which would be limited to a build. And if it's green, that just means that the code built. But the test part of it, like the make check, the Ceph API, and so on. So the checks that then actually run tests would be optional. Now, this has actually, I guess, some complications for the build team, because if done naively, then when you request for the checks to run, everything would need to be rebuilt. But I think with the caching infrastructure with the distributed cache that they're putting in place, that may not be that big of a deal. So anyway, just wanted to clarify that I wasn't proposing to skip the build step. My proposal was limited just to the testing step.
Why not? Why shouldn't we?
You mean why not skip the build as well?
Yes.
Well, because at that point, the fact that someone pushed, like you don't even know when let's say someone pushed their code and they asked to a reviewer to take a look, the reviewer doesn't even know if it builds, right? So that's kind of the first thing that you look at when when reviewing something. So that's like the most basic smoke test is whether it builds. So I think the build is valuable, but I'm again, this is just a proposal, so we can also skip the build step, but that might be taking this too far, because then you would just end up with people constantly requesting, with PRs kind of flooded with the comment that requests the build.
So I think that's a good point about wanting checks just to verify that you haven't broken something obvious. And to me, that's kind of just the whole goal of make check. I see that as being the purpose of it. It's not enough to verify PRs because it only builds with Clang on a Ubuntu. So it doesn't test that we haven't broken GCC builds or broken packaging or installation or QA suites. So I think that still Toothology or at least Shaman builds need to be part of validating and merging PRs. And so that's why I'm leaning towards moving more of the stuff into Teuthology and relying less on test coverage in make check itself. I think that should just be really fast unit tests to catch obvious errors, and then have the longer running expensive stuff happen asynchronously in Teuthology, which also has the advantage that you only have to run a pull request against the QA suites that are relevant to it.
I think what Ilya said regarding building is not for the making sure that we build on CentOS and GCC and all that stuff. It's just that you don't want to see comments in the PR. This line doesn't even compile. It's not C++, right? So just to make sure that the code compiles.
Simply don't review if it doesn't. Ask
Yeah.
for it to be manually make checked before you review.
Well, I'm not sure that would work for like that's just an additional step that would then need to be taken on every PR, right? So that doesn't seem like that's just kind of process for the sake of process, because it wouldn't actually relieve the resources on the Jenkins side if everyone kind of requests that anyway. So the make check. I mean, we could still, like, along with the build step, execute some, really basic, like smoke-like subset of tests, which is, I think someone wanted it to be like under 10 minutes. That seems to be a kind of a good number, maybe to target, and hope, like, keep those tests to common code as much as possible. So to everything under source/common, or other infrastructure, such as, for example, like we have a buffer list unit test, which is, despite being common, takes quite a long time to run. So it won't fit in 10 minutes, I don't think. But this is the types and kind of the unit tests for the types that are used across Ceph. Maybe that's something that that everyone would benefit from. Beyond that, it's very hard to justify. I mean, even if the unit test doesn't take a long time, but it is very specific to a particular component, then, I mean, you could still kind of extend the argument that I don't need this test, like I don't want this test to be run, right? You can still use this argument even for unit test, which let's say takes just a minute, but has nothing to do with the stuff that you're working on. So that's kind of the yeah. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I just want to riff on what you just said, because there are times, and I've experienced this myself, where you think you're working in one area and you don't realize you're affecting some. So there is some value in running more maybe think is necessary, but we might just be trying to constrain that to certain windows, if that makes sense.
There was a discussion about running about running the build step on every PR. I agree it should be the default behavior. If somebody sends a PR, then very likely imposing extra step on reviewers or author or anybody else is pure burden. But I also buy there is some need for code changes intended not for merging, but only for getting other developers familiar with. Maybe we should put a distinction in terms of building between PRs, between pull requests, and draft pull requests.
Yeah,
How
that
about
was suggested at the beginning of the meeting, and
sorry, I missed that.
yeah. So that's I'm not sure if like I would expect that to be easily implementable with like a GitHub with a GitHub API on the Ceph build side to either completely disable all checks on draft PRs or do something really minimal, maybe verify. I'm not sure. Like, do you want to avoid even the builds on the draft PR?
Yes, will, in that arrangement, drafts will become purely for humans.
Okay, that I think that makes sense. So yeah, if we can, it sounds like we are all in agreement on that. So
As long
maybe
as there's a
that's
Jenkins command to trigger a build if you want it, that would be great. For
well.
example, I like to use draft PRs just to iterate on something until I think that it's ready for a review, which means that I do want to verify it compiles.
Well, today we have a command which just runs all checks. It's like Jenkins test this please or something. Like that's the one that will run all checks. So do you want something that would, if we're now talking about requesting just the build, before talking about how that would be requested, we need to talk about actually introducing such a check that which would perform on which would be limited to a build and then not run any tests after that.
I mean, yeah, even if we don't have a separate build-only check, I think it would be useful to skip checks by default on draft pull requests. And then if you want a check to run, you can ask Jenkins to trigger it.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that we already have in place, except for the bit that, except for the first part where checks are still triggered automatically on draft PRs. So
yeah, just a comment about that. Unless I'm mistaken, when you raise the pull request, it's not a draft right away. Oh no, there is a way you can
yeah,
initiate.
there is a way to, yeah, yep.
Okay, yeah. Never mind, that's not an issue.
However, like this is still something that this is an opt-in thing, and kind of the wider developer base, which is often responsible for dozens of pushes and minor PRs. That's that's still like that I think that's still something that we need to find a way to resolve, because that is on top of like make check taking potentially like an hour, and Ceph API check also being not very far from that. The other factor that is contributing to the frustration here is just that Jenkins is overloaded by all these jobs that get run, and then either no one looks at them, or just because they don't even care whether they pass or not, because they're going to do another push in like 3 hours. That's something that I think we also need to address, because we are basically just wasting resources as it is today.
About that, I think we need to, or I'm seeing amongst all the suggestions, there are two trains of thought here. One is to change how the Jenkins infrastructure is working, like how, when, and where tests are triggered. And then the other is more, so that would more concern the build team. But then the other school of thought is paring down the the unit tests that we have, and that is more. I think that's going to lie more on developers or per team. So I think we can go to the build team about changing the Jenkins structure. But then if certain tests need to be moved into Teuthology, for instance, I think that might be something that's up to each individual component to decide.
Yeah, and maybe on the second point, getting some metrics about runtime of individual tests would help us figure out which test cases to focus on. And to me, the obvious solution is to move them to Teuthology, but that doesn't, Ilya was not happy with that.
Go ahead, Adam.
I've made some changes to unit tests to basically silence them on Jenkins. So the unit tests for BlueFS that are running are specifically reduced to reduce execution time. Maybe that's a way to go also.
Well, I think this is going to, this is where the kind of the per component kind of part of it comes in. Because for RBD, I don't want to reduce. I actually want Jenkins to execute as much as possible because I consider the tests that are executed in Jenkins to be the gate for the Teuthology suite that I'm going to schedule later. It's like not the other way around. And so for RBD, what we would likely do is if there is a consensus that we are not going to be satisfied by tweaks on the quote unquote build team side, where we change the strategy as to how these jobs are triggered, but keep the jobs like the structure of these checks as they are today. If that is not a satisfactory solution, then for RBD, what we're going to do is we're going to take the existing RBD tests, which take a long time, I think up to 45 minutes of wall clock time in the common case, and move them into a RBD check, which RBD developers would be would request with a comment on the PR, or going forward, we can tie this to the RBD label, perhaps. That remains, that's a different question, but the kind of for everyone in this meeting, just at a high level, this would be a separate check, which can be triggered but would not be triggered automatically. Like Casey said, I disagree with the idea of moving it to Teuthology because we put a lot of work into making it possible to run those tests outside of Teuthology, precisely so that they could be run in Jenkins, and we could, and the RBD team could get early feedback on the changes without waiting for the Teuthology suite to go through. So that's what we would do on the RBD side. If the kind of easier and less invasive solution of keeping MadeCheck and Ceph API and all of the other checks as is, and simply reducing the number of times that they're executed, that's what we're going to do. And other components, might consider doing the same, or move to Teuthology. It's going to be, like you said, up to a per component decision.
Yeah, okay. So a separate RBD check does sound like a reasonable compromise. But if we go too far in that direction, then have several different checks, like every every separate check is going to have to redo the entire build. So that's not optimal. But for RBD, avoiding the need to run those tests on unrelated PRs, I think would be a big help.
Well, I think maybe we could do kind of a combination here of the something based on labels, where the tests are kind of similar to what is currently done for docs, where it's a bit of a hack, sure, but it works, and it's just based on a path-based filter. Make check, just the entirety of make check gets skipped. We could change the scripts that, for example, speaking of RBD, the scripts that that kind of launch RBD unit tests there, to only do that when the when either there is an RBD label on the PR, or just explicitly list out the paths that the RBD team is interested in, and then that would be kind of the default make check that could even be automatically triggered. And if someone still wants RBD tests to be run, again, there would be, I guess, a separate check with a or separate kind of way to trigger the same kind of global make check, but without any of these exclusions enabled, such that everything is run. That might be kind of the ultimate goal, and because it's flexible in kind of all directions that you can think of. It doesn't impose unnecessary tests on the one hand, and on the other hand, it makes it possible to run the tests that can be run outside of tautology if needed, and if folks are interested.
Just one comment. This is also related to my next topic, and this is there's a possibility in Jenkins to take all the artifacts from one run and use it in another run, so you don't have to build everything twice. You just zip everything, copy that over, and continue with the unit test based on whatever you already executed with the previous build.
Right, but that's if the checks are if these are kind of two different checks. So let's say you pushed a PR, and then you wanted just to build, and then that happened, and then some time passed, and now you want to run some heavier weight checks sometime later. This solution would need, like, you would basically need to store that build tree somewhere, and then there's a question for how long you want to do that, and if the builds are fast and we have that distributed cache and it only takes 15 minutes, then maybe maybe it's easier to just do a rebuild. I don't know. So the fact that Jenkins is and super inefficient, that's known. That has been known for years, because right now, even though we are guaranteed to trigger all checks on every push, we still rebuild. So make check does a build, Ceph API does a different build. The Windows check does two builds inside of it, believe it or not, because it does it does a build just like make check and Ceph API, and then yet another Windows specific build inside of it with min.gw compiler. So it's like everything is built several times. I think at least 4 times right now. And we could definitely benefit from this kind of multi-step approach, and caching the build at least for the duration of when it's a single trigger. But if the triggers are like, if it's if you triggered something and then you trigger something on the same PR that hasn't changed 6 hours later, then it's not clear if the benefit of or if the complexity of kind of caching the build tree in that case would kind of whether that is worthwhile.
This brings a question about the policy on parallelism of those builds. I guess there is little sense in building everything in parallel. Uh, Perhaps we could save a lot of cycles, a lot of resources, uh, if we switch to building at least some of them sequential. For instance, if somebody pushed a branch having C++ errors, they will pop up as good in the x86 building step as well as IRM 64 most likely. So if one of them fails, little business in starting another one.
Um, I think that's something that would spare again spare Jenkins resources, but would prolong the time that it takes for the check to run. And if it's and I think that's the major concern. People don't actually see whether Jenkins is loaded or not loaded. What they do see is how long it takes for the checks to go green. And this is something that, like, if they are sequential, for example, if ARM builds or if the ARM-based checks in general are sequenced after the x86 based checks, that's basically double the time.
Yes, that will be a consequence. Also, we don't need to have a strict static ordering. It's just A, not B. Uh, Anyway, I also don't think we need to be fast every single time. I fully agree. I fully see a need for uh, having all the results as soon as possible, but in restricted circumstances, like let's say uh, wrapping up a release. So perhaps having a way to speed the things up, even by emitting a command, triggering a check manually, could be enough.
Go ahead, Adam.
Mm, One a bit separated topic. I noticed that when Jenkins is actually loaded, a lot of tests are failing because of timeout. And it seems to be like a positive feed-up loop. The more people are rerunning make check, and the longer it takes to run, and the more often it fails due to timeout. Maybe we could somehow address that issue too.
In my opinion, I see we've had a lot of different suggestions coming through. I think we should start a bit smaller and attack the most low hanging fruits first. And to me, that is when or stopping tests from running on draft PRs or PRs that aren't ready, and having that be changed. So I don't know what everybody else thinks, but we could just start with that and then see what else is necessary. Or if something is super important for a certain component to fix, that's fine. I don't mean to stop that from happening, but just to kind of organize the ideas that we have suggested. I can see that it's kind of a big plan. So I'm suggesting that we start on the things that are easier to go for first. All right. Yeah, there's an infrastructure team meeting later in the week, so I don't think there's anybody on the call today. So we can't take all this as a given. We would need to ask what's possible. But I think breaking it down, like, okay, first we want to see if we can make draft PRs not have any checks run on them, just as a first step. That would be a good first step to bring to the build team. And also, I wrote down some of people's ideas on the agenda. So if you refresh the agenda, you should see that. Feel free to add anything that was missed. And then also, of course, we have this recorded and I'll try to get this uploaded. But yeah, feel free to add anything that was missed. Are there any final comments that we want to add? Or I know there are other topics today.
Well, I still want, even though there are other topics, I want, since we have some participation, I want to kind of ask a question of like, what do people think? So let's say timing wasn't an issue, and or like not timing, reliability wasn't an issue. So if like Ceph API check was perfect and wasn't failing, like RBD tests also like weren't failing, and then passing on a rerun. So like we didn't have any of those issues. But still, make check took the time that it takes today. So you needed to wait for those checks for an hour or maybe even 2 hours if there is some queuing, or maybe even longer. What do people think that that gating PRs on these checks that that potentially have nothing to do with the change in the PR, or that is most often the case? That's the case, I think, like 90% of the time. Do people think that the global gate aspect of these checks, like the fact that they're required for merging, is valuable? And like, is that something that we want to strive to keep, or are we as a project okay with dismantling make check and compartmentalizing into smaller scope checks that would be specific to their respective components and not be required for merging? Are there any strong opinions?
I always advocate for the global aspect, but I'm sure there are things that can be cut out. I'm not saying that's not a thing, but just one example that I can think of where the global aspect is important is a lot of the manager modules use commands from any component, and we query those commands and parse them through with JSON. And if you change a command in the C++ code, change the JSON output, for instance, that can affect a manager module that's querying that command. So that's just one instance where the global aspect there is important, but I'm sure there are places where it's not as well.
Yeah, I agree that there's definitely a place for those. Like, to me, this is kind of a social problem of organizing multiple separate component teams and managing kind of code dependencies between them. And so I think it definitely makes sense to prevent other teams from